Hello, everyone. My name is Kyle Smealy. I'm the Policy and Communications Director for the San Francisco Community Land Trust. And we are here today to talk about anti-displacement strategy and preservation. Really, it is about keeping the people who make our communities in their communities. Starting with a quick disclaimer, this session is for informational and educational purposes only. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed herein are those of me, the presenter, and do not necessarily reflect the views of SFCLT. This information should not be considered a substitute for professional legal advice. So a bit about what we're going to cover today. We're going to start with the roots of SFCLT and the context in San Francisco at the time. We'll talk more broadly about housing affordability and what are known as the three Ps, one of which is preservation. We'll talk about what that looks like in practice. We'll talk about the benefits of the community land trust model and how it functions as a structural anti-displacement tool. And then we'll cover at the end what's next, what's on the road ahead for preservation. Okay, so a bit about SFCLT. We came about in 2003. We'll go a little bit more into the context of how we came about. But currently, we have 16 buildings with just under 180 units of permanently affordable housing. All of our properties are within the city and county of San Francisco, but we have since 2023 lent technical support to other CLTs and small developers across the Bay Area, particularly emerging CLTs, where we can offer some of our expertise we've developed over the past 2 decades to help them scale their work. So a bit about the context when SFCLT was founded. We emerged out of the first dot-com boom and the waves of displacement that were caused by companies coming to the area, higher earning workers coming to places that had historically been low income communities and causing speculative activity that drove rents up and pushed out communities of color and low income communities across the board. But a few statistics that are telling: between 2000 and 2015, nearly 3,000 low income Black households were pushed out of San Francisco. And over a roughly similar time period, 8,000 Latino families left the mission. And the numbers tell a story, but there also is a human element that shouldn't be lost here. And one saying that really sticks with me is from a San Francisco artist named Rene Yanez, who is widely credited with bringing the Dia de los Muertos celebration to San Francisco. And he has a saying that San Francisco is a place that celebrates its murals and evicts its muralists. And it really is trying to stem that tide that San Francisco Community Land Trust came about. What does that look like? So this is a map from the Urban Displacement Project at the University of California, Berkeley, and it kind of shows where the gentrification and pressures were really the highest. And you can see it's in the Mission District, in the South of Market area, in the Tenderloin. This is where a lot of low-income artists, communities, creatives had been living for decades. And as these new waves of gentrification and displacement came about, these communities were severely impacted. In addition to sort of the tech-fueled displacement, there were the phenomena of corporate consolidation. So mega landlords like Veritas Investments would come in, particularly in the foreclosure crisis of 2008, 2009. They came in and swallowed up vast amounts of large and even small buildings in San Francisco. And their business model really is predicated on raising rents, pushing out long-term tenants so they can take their rent-controlled units, reset them to market rate, and make more of a margin on those homes. And even though San Francisco does have protections like rent control and just cause eviction protections, tenants remain vulnerable because they don't always have access to the ability to assert those rights, and they often are in homes that are neglected, there's deferred maintenance, and they aren't in safe living conditions. So despite protections, there has been intense pressures to push long-term residents out of their homes in San Francisco. And it really is from that tradition that SFCLT came about. Housing activists who had seen massive displacement said we need to be pushing back on that, and they created SFCLT. We have been a leader in the preservation and pushing the community ownership model. Our model involves identifying at-risk buildings with long-term residents, converting them to permanently affordable housing, and making sure that people can stay in their home in perpetuity. And we've been helpful in not just acquiring buildings, but creating policies to help scale this work in San Francisco. So, backing up for just a bit, let's talk about the three Ps of housing affordability. So, this is widely credited as the path towards a holistic way to make housing more in reach for working people and their families, and it involves three interrelated parts. The first is production. So, that's building new housing from scratch, that is from the ground up. Um, and it is contrasted to housing preservation. And that involves identifying existing housing and purchasing it and turning it into deed restricted affordable housing. And then protections refer to things like the tenant right to counsel for residents facing eviction, rent control, just cause eviction protections to help keep tenants in their home. And it really is these three aspects working in concert where cities and really anywhere can realize a more affordable place for the residents to live. So what we're talking about today is the preservation piece of the three Ps, and that is the community land trust model that we use. So there's really three aspects of how a CLT works. So the first is the land ownership is permanently owned by the CLT. And what this guarantees is that the structures that are on top of it remain permanently affordable. There's different ways. There's home ownership models, there's rental models. We'll go into those in just a minute. But by keeping the land owned by the CLT, it guarantees permanent affordability. And then another really important aspect of the CLT model is community governance. And that means that we involve residents and community members in the decision-making apparatus of our organization, and residents as well in our cooperatives have an ability to have a say in the direction of their individual homes. So what does this actually look like in practice? So we're going to go through a very quick run through of just a few models of the CLT. So these are two different structures on two different parcels of land. In the CLT model, the land is owned by the community, by the CLT, and it is offered as a 99-year ground lease, so functionally, permanently affordable to those structures. And we're going to go through two different models. The first is a home ownership model that it remains permanently affordable. This could come in a few forms. The limited equity housing cooperative is what we primarily use at SFCLT. What this offers is a lower purchase price. So the structure is the only thing that is being bought by the residents and not the underlying land. So the costs go down. And it remains affordable in perpetuity. So the residents will purchase shares of their home, and it limits how much they can resell them. So it remains a community benefit. Even if those residents decide to leave, they can resell them, but they are limited in how much profit they can make. And that way it keeps it affordable to the next person who wants to buy it. And one of the big anti-displacement benefits of the home ownership model is that it allows residents to build limited equity, but also to pass on their homes to their heirs. And this is something in San Francisco that has been a huge issue and really all around the Bay Area, an inability to pass wealth down and stability down from one generation to another because of lack of access to home ownership. So this is one model where it lets residents pass that down while keeping homes permanently affordable. So that's the home ownership model of the CLT. Contrast that to the rental model. So in this model, it is more of a traditional landlord-tenant relationship between the CLT and the people living in the building. But there are some important aspects, including permanent stability. So there's no eviction without cause. There's no unnecessary rent increases. And there are lower costs to the residents as well. So in the home ownership model, if, for example, the boiler breaks, it is the responsibility of those homeowners to pay for those upgrades. In the rental model, that remains the responsibility of the CLT. So for some people, that's a better fit. For others, the homeownership model is more desirable. But what's important to note here is that it really is adaptive to what is the most important aspect for the residents themselves. We try to be responsive to what works best for them. And so, really, what in both of these models is present is we make sure that there's resident voice in the governance of these buildings. So, under the CLT model, all residents have a voice in their home, whether that's through the organizational voice of having seats on the board of directors or having actual nonprofits run their homes and guide their decisions in the cooperative model. Okay, so that's a bit about what it looks like in practice. Now we're going to talk about a few specific programs to San Francisco that have helped us grow our model. And the first is the Small Sites Program. This was a city-funded initiative which we helped co-develop in 2014, and it involves providing funding for small multifamily buildings, usually between 5 and 25 units, where we've identified tenants who are at risk of displacement. They may be subject to an LSAC eviction. They may have their buildings being imminently put on the private market and up for speculative sale. This allows us to get funding from the city to build a capital stack to actually purchase those buildings and make them permanently affordable, which keeps the tenants in place in perpetuity. And really, like the impact of this has been huge. Hundreds of homes have been permanently preserved through the Small Sites Program. In it, not just like the homes themselves, but the communities have significantly benefited. We know that it has helped maintain people in places like the Mission, Chinatown, the Tenderloin, where there have been displacement pressures. This has been a critical tool in making sure that we can keep people rooted in those communities. It's also been foundational in helping make sure that we are improving building quality and safety. SSP, as it's known, includes funds for critical rehab, allowing for us to address deferred maintenance, seismic issues, life safety repairs, needed upgrades. And this is so important because almost every building that we find in San Francisco has significant deferred maintenance. It's one of the reasons why we're able to afford them is because the current owner knows that there's a lot of upgrades that have not been made over the years. Every one of our buildings is more than a century old in San Francisco. So having the Small Sites Program make money available for upgrades has been really critical. And and so that really is the Small Sites Program in a nutshell. It's been a critical tool. One of the challenges is that the Small Sites Program gets funding from a variety of sources, but it isn't always predictable and it isn't always steady. So we find ourselves having to figure out what is the future of the Small Sites Program. There is a funding source that is meant for seismic upgrades, and it has been used as a chief funding source for the Small Sites Program, but that is a finite amount, and we're trying to figure out sort of how we can fund this in a way that's consistent and lets us plan over time. Another aspect in program that we have used to help stop displacement and keep communities rooted is the Community Opportunity to Purchase Act, also known as COPA. This was enacted in 2019, and it gives qualified nonprofit housing organizations like SFCLT the first right to purchase multifamily rental properties when the owners decide to sell. And it's designed to allow us to intervene in the speculative market before displacement occurs. And it really gives us a breathing space before properties go on the private market. It allows us to contact residents, to understand if a community land trust is a good fit for them, and to put together potential capital for acquisition. And briefly, how COPA works is it starts with a notification. So property owners of three buildings with 3 units or more that go on the private market must notify COPA qualified nonprofits like SFCLT before their buildings actually go on the open market. And what that triggers is a 5-day window for us to make a right or to indicate interest, and then we have 25 days thereafter, so 30 days total, to make an offer on that property. If after that the owner receives another offer, the nonprofit is given a right of first refusal. So we're able to match that or make an offer to match that private offer to purchase the property. And this really gives us a period of time to collaborate with tenants to figure out sort of what the capital stack could look like with the small sites program, with private funding, with loans from banks, with philanthropic support. It is critical that we have this breathing period before the building goes in the private market to try to do that. We would love to have more time to do it. 30 days goes by very quickly, but it is one of those tools that has been critical to enable us to get our foot in the door and to keep people in their homes. It has been estimated, we got information from the city earlier this year that 436 homes have been taken off the private market via the COPA program. That amounts to more than 1,000 San Franciscans who have had their fears of eviction or displacement, um, you know, met and able to be permanently in their homes through this program. Okay, so to date, as we said at the opening, San Francisco Community Land Trust has uh, 16, hopefully 17 buildings soon, and with 174 permanently affordable homes. And really, we've been able to do this through strong collaborations with anti-displacement organizers to make preservation a tool to keep communities rooted. And we're going to go through just two quick vignettes of what that has looked like to date. The first is actually our very first acquisition in Chinatown called Columbus United Cooperative. This is a 21 unit building in Chinatown with almost exclusively and a vast majority of monolingual Chinese residents. Um, in the mid 2000s, their property was going to be sold actually to the City College of San Francisco to develop a Chinatown campus, which would have involved their building being demolished and them having to figure out where to live in San Francisco. The city intervened and with some elected officials and with SFCLT sort of in its nascent form, we worked with the residents to figure out a way to stop the demolition and actually purchase their building. And we worked with a nonprofit legal defense group to make this all happen. And this actually became our first property in 2009. And through that, we worked with the residents to not just stabilize the building, but turn it into a limited equity housing cooperative where all of those residents own an equity share in their homes. And this has such a tangible human benefit to it. And I'll give you just one example. One long-term resident, Mrs. Peng, she had an infant daughter at the time that the building was purchased in 2009. Ms. Peng has spent her career as a hotel worker, and her daughter was able to grow up in that building, go on to the University of California, Berkeley, and study architecture there. And because she had a permanently affordable home in San Francisco, she was able to have a stable upbringing. And with a household that wasn't earning a ton of money, but was enough to live in this permanently affordable home. And now Ms. Peng's daughter literally is shaping what San Francisco looks like going forward with her degree in architecture. So that's the kind of success story that we know we can achieve through long-term, permanently affordable housing cooperatives like Columbus United. A more recent example came at 320 14th Street. This was a building that was purchased by a mega landlord back in 2019. As we mentioned before, corporate consolidation has been a huge part of displacement pressures in San Francisco. When the big landlord bought it, immediately they refused to make important repairs that the residents demanded. Um, and the residents worked with tenant organizers to form a union at home. And that is a law that is in San Francisco where buildings of 5 units or more where 50% of the residents agree to form a union, the landlord is required to meet and confer with those residents and to make necessary repairs, to do things like negotiate rent reductions. And if they do not meet and confer with those residents, it is considered a loss of housing services, and the residents can actually go on rent strike. And that's exactly what happened in this instance. The residents, because those necessary repairs were not being made, they went on a rent strike, and this building actually went during the course of that rent strike from one corporate landlord to another. But the residents remained very, together. They refused to have any of sort of the offers from the landlords for one tenant to drop their rent strike. No, they stayed together. They practiced solidarity, and they said, we want our building to be owned by the community land trust. And so we worked really closely with the anti-displacement organizers, with the residents, to figure out a path to get this building acquired. And we were very fortunate in 2023 to identify some regional funding that was fairly new from the Bay Area Housing Finance Authority. And we were able to put an offer together with the support of the Housing Accelerator Fund. This is another nonprofit that helps fund these acquisitions throughout the Bay Area. And we were able to take this building off the private market. It's a great example of how the community land trust can work with on the ground anti-displacement organizers to create the conditions to buy buildings and take them off the speculative market. And what's immensely helpful in San Francisco, and in other places throughout the Bay Area is when you have these on the ground organizers, there can be a triangulation between them working directly with the residents, and then the CLT working both with the residents and with the current owner to say, let's figure out a way to make this transition happen. Let's take this off your hands. Let's get a win-win for the community, for you, and it's something we can all celebrate and be proud of. And that really is the story of 14th Street. So it raises some of the benefits that are specific to CLTs, but we'll go through just a few of them and why they're so important. So CLTs, at their root, they keep residents in place. It allows CLTs to acquire and preserve existing housing so that tenants aren't forced out by rent increases or speculative sales. It also assures long-term affordability and stewardship because we provide 99-year ground leases that functionally are in perpetuity. We know that these homes will be affordable for generations to come. And especially when there is the limited equity home ownership, we allow for wealth building and economic equity. And residents can build modest equity while keeping their homes affordable for future buyers. There also is maybe a less appreciated but very important environmental angle to CLTs. When we rehab existing buildings, we reduce the waste that is caused by demolition, and the embodied carbon in those buildings. So by keeping those structures and rehabilitating them, we're having significant environmental benefits. And at the same time, by keeping workers in their communities and reducing vehicle miles traveled, we greatly see an environmental benefit there as well. And then there is the sort of more qualitative social cohesion and healthy communities. CLTs often serve as hubs for community organizing, for community service. We saw this during the pandemic where there was mutual aid networks set up in some of our CLTs to look after their neighbors. These are the kind of things that residents can do when they don't have to worry about major rent increases or speculative eviction. And then one really important aspect to this is that as compared to the production of new housing, CLTs are an incredibly cost-efficient way to create housing that is permanently affordable. In San Francisco and throughout the Bay Area, the cost of a new affordable unit can be anywhere between 800,000 and $1 million. It's a lot of money. Um, CLTs are a fraction of that. They're anywhere from a quarter million and sometimes even less than that to a $500,000. So you're looking at, a quarter to a half of what it costs to build a new affordable unit. Now, going back to the three Ps, we need all the above, but we also know that in tough budget times, CLTs are a great investment to make sure that we can get more affordable housing online. And lastly, CLTs can look different in different places, and they can respond to different needs in different communities. And this is really, we see this in an urban context. There's long-term renters, there's gentrification, there's corporate landlords, and this can really be a counterbalance to those forces. But CLTs also are very effective in rural environments where there's maybe farm workers, for example, or other residents who want to live closer to where they work in smaller buildings, but it still can be used in those contexts to keep those communities in their homes as well. Okay, so like I said, in urban areas and rural areas, this can look different, but really it is responding to the same root causes. The CLTs allow local residents to stay in their homes, and it keeps outside investors from pushing people out who created their communities. And ultimately, this is about belonging. This is about ensuring that residents have a long-term ability to stay in their communities. We'll give one example maybe of what this looks like outside of San Francisco. So Clam in West Marin identified a building on 3rd Street. It's a 2-unit home, dates back to 1912. And what they're planning to do with that home is to actually remodel it and add an accessory dwelling unit or ADU. And this is a great example of how we can use the CLT model to um, keep homes for generations to come. So allow this home to be a place where multiple generations of people in West Marin can live, and at the same time add density in a way that doesn't foundationally disrupt what communities look like. So you can add an ADU, you can do the kind of things that can increase housing opportunities without having unintended impacts on neighborhoods. So what's next for preservation? So we talked about a few programs and policy tools like the Small Sites Program, like COPA, and they have been incredibly effective in keeping people in their homes. But the challenge is, how do we scale that? And I think that that really boils down to not treating it as a crisis response or a one-off effort, but really making sure we can fund those programs, have the sort of collaboration and sustained public investment to scale them and to succeed. And that requires, organizing and making sure we can make the case to both the public sector and philanthropic sector that this is worthy of investment. Some updates on the state level. So in this past legislative session, AB 670 was passed that allows local jurisdictions to credit units that were purchased through preservation programs towards their regional housing needs allocation. This is really important, particularly because the state is putting more pressure on localities and jurisdictions to meet these regional housing goals and to enable the preservation work to count towards these targets really creates a stronger financial incentive and policy incentive to invest in preservation. So where a jurisdiction has some funds available for housing, they can say, well, if we use these for preservation, we can make sure they count towards our state mandated goals, and we can make them go further because it is so much more cost effective to preserve a home as compared to producing it from scratch. And then on a broader level, there are additional efforts to promote regional collaboration to scale community ownership. At SFCLT, we're doing our Capacity Catalyst program to provide technical assistance to emerging CLTs. We just finished a pilot program where we saw our collaboration with 4 different CLTs was immensely helpful in helping them through the more professionalized aspects of their work. At the same time, on the regional level, there are efforts that are happening to put funding mechanisms up in future ballot measures. There was an attempt in 2024 to get a bond measure that didn't make it to the ballot, but there are efforts to enable different funding streams to come back. Right now, folks are looking at 2028 to have another significant effort to get more funding for all types of affordable housing, in the region, including preservation. So we know what we need to scale this movement. We need public investment, and there are many avenues that are happening to see that to fruition. We know this model works. We just know it needs to be invested in. But when it does work, it changes lives, and can change our region for the better. So that is the end of our presentation. If you have any questions or want any further information, my contact is here, ksmealy@sfclt.org. Thank you.